Yeah, so they're tearing down all the buildings, but it's in different phases. They're tearing down the field house, basically all the remodeling of older modern buildings and connections. But the old main building, instead of staying, I guess it's after trying to keep my banter to it. Second.
Sarah, you ready? Okay. I'd like to call to order the May 11th, 2017 Planning Commission. Each of you have been provided a copy of the proposed agenda for tonight's meeting. I'd entertain a motion to approve the proposed agenda.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, next on the agenda is the election of officers for this year. This was postponed from last month's meeting. We have two positions to fill, the chair and the secretary. So I entertain a motion for the appointment of a chair and a motion for the appointment of a secretary.
I make a motion that we appoint Kevin Case as chair.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion for secretary for next year.
Who currently holds that?
It was Karen Todd.
I move that can we nominate someone who's not here?
You can do whatever you would like.
Sure. We nominate, I move to nominate Dave Wood.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, Mr. Wood in absentia is our new secretary. Jonathan, I direct you to notify him of this honor.
Absolutely.
All right, next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the March 2nd, 2017 meeting. You've been provided a copy of those.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, next on the agenda, we have an opportunity of comments from the public. There are specific agenda items tonight that might provide opportunities for public comment. So if you have specific agenda-related items, we could take those at that time. Otherwise, we'd entertain comments from the public at this point. All right, seeing none. The next item on the agenda is number 6, consideration of a final plat application from the city of North Kansas City. First, I'll hear from staff on procedure.
So on final plats, what we are looking for is to ensure that they comply with the previously adopted preliminary plat and that they are dedicating all necessary rights of way and easements and that they otherwise conform with the standards that we set forth in the subdivision ordinance. In this case, you all approved the preliminary plat for this quite a while ago, and we held the public hearing at that time. Final plats, then you do your review and make a recommendation to the city council, which takes final action before the plat is recorded. Would you like me to go on?
Please.
Okay. This is the third plat that we are doing for the Armour Road redevelopment area. We began at the west corner of the development, and we have been gradually working our way east with these. And this should be the last plat for this northern section right along Armour Road. One of the major features of this plat is that it dedicates the right-of-way for the extension of Vernon Street south of Armour, for the remainder of Mill Street here on the north end of the development, and for Railroad Avenue. We do have our engineer, Jonathan Hofflander with Olson Associates here, if you have any technical questions about the plat. Otherwise, staff would recommend a recommendation of approval to the city council.
All right, any questions from the commission with regard to the applicant or staff?
I guess one question, I noticed they're working on the electricity down there now. Is all those poles gonna disappear, or?
Yes, we will end up with underground electrical service
everything
throughout
is-
the development. We would like for the poles to disappear a little faster. KCP&L has been a little slow in getting that work done.
So before us tonight is a recommendation for approval, recommend approval with certain conditions, or to recommend disapproval of the final plat. Chair would entertain a motion.
I recommend approval of the final plan as presented in front of us, before us.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right.
Thank
We've
you.
made-
This will appear on the June 6th city council agenda.
Next on the agenda is consideration of a site plan review application, North Kansas City School District. First, we'll hear from staff on procedure, and then from the applicant.
So to start with the procedure, the zoning ordinance specifies that for public and quasi-public buildings in this zoning district, the R1A district, that site plans must be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. Typically, you all don't look at site plans. They're handled by staff administratively. But in this case, this is part of your job. And it also sets forth 2 criteria for you to look at. This is not a public hearing, so we're not required to do any sort of notice or for you to take any comments, although you are free to do so if you choose. This was associated with another application to the Board of Zoning Adjustment, which did hold a public hearing on April 27th, and they did approve a height variance for this project of up to 75 feet for Wing A of the building addition and up to 45 feet for Wings B and C. So when we sent out the notice for that public hearing, we also notified people about this meeting so that they were aware of the entire scope of meetings around this project. So we do have the applicant here, the BNIM Architects, on behalf of the school district, and I'll let them begin their presentation about this project.
Sarah, before we do that, can
Yes.
you tell the commission about the notice that was given with regard to the BZA?
So for any sort of variance application, we are required to publish notice in the newspaper. We use the Kansas City Star at least 15 days in advance. We are required to post signs on the property and at least 15 days in advance, and also to send mailed notices to property owners who own property within 185 feet of the subject property. In this case, because we knew that there was also a lot of general interest in the neighborhood, we expanded the mailed notice. And instead of 185 feet, we were basically sending notices to everybody who was within about a block and a half of the high school property. That ended up being about 168 mailed notices up to property owners. And
Then at the BZA itself, were there members of the public present?
yes, BZA meetings are usually maybe one person, which is usually the applicant. And we did have a crowd in the audience. I'd say around 20 people, and we had 7 to 8 people from the area speak.
So the notice was apparently effective.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. I now turn the floor over to the applicant with regard to the matter. Please introduce yourself. Welcome, you're among friends.
We're going to set up a few materials
Sure.
to talk about, but I'm Joe Keel with BNIM Architects, principal, and I have Kyle Patno from BNIM as well on behalf of the North Kansas City School District.
Welcome.
They brought their blocks to play with.
Okay, so we have obviously some visuals here that we'll reference during the presentation, and please, anyone feel free to come up and take a look as well. Again, we've been working with the North Kansas City School District for a little over a year now in formulating the plan for the new Northtown, the addition, expansion, and renovation of the school. So the site plan really consists of a couple different components, and the area to the west, which is located just west of Old Main, we consider the addition, and it's made up of 3 distinctive wings of space, and those are really, as Sarah alluded to, and I'll just move from south to north. The southwest wing is what we consider Wing A. That is the arts wing that houses on the first floor, largely from the south side, music and choir and band practice rooms on the first level. As you move to the north, you get into music storage and things like that, sort of more of a utility function, offices related to that program. As you move further to the north across the hallway, and I'll show the floor plans here in a moment, into the shop areas, Project Lead the Way, CAD labs, things of that.
That the 75-foot part of that's gonna be in the first part.
Yes, sir. That's correct. So, and again, I'll get up and I can even point that out. That's a very good question. As you move further to the north, we actually have separated each one of these wings by a courtyard space. The little links that are associated between the wings basically serve as restrooms, vertical circulation, circulation between the 2 wings as well. As you move up to the north wing, the area that's delineated by number 7, that's largely classroom space. So that, as I alluded to in Wing A, which is 2-story space, but that's where the auditorium is on the second level. Black Box Theater on the second level as well. As you move to the area denoted by a number 7, that's stacked classrooms. So in that, you'll find your typical classroom spaces, as well as fax labs, science labs, and things of that sort. So again, that even though that's 3 stories, it's still shorter than the southernmost wing, which is delineated by number 6. As you move further to the north, again, you have another link space that is connecting each of those wings. You'll go once you're moving through that length to the north wing. The area delineated by number 8 is the cafeteria. It's a 2-story cafeteria space that has sort of opening from one floor to the next. And allows for a smaller footprint. That was kind of one of our big things that we were looking at, just understanding the program of what the Northtown really needed as a school to function as a high school and develop its program and curriculum. They were looking to house a total of 1,800 students in the long run in the cafeteria. Right now, they're close to 200, which isn't enough, definitely. And so moving to that cafeteria to really service their needs, but stacking it on one on top of the other, really allows them flexibility to keep the footprint of the overall site plan down. Number 9 area is the main gymnasium and field house, which associated with the cafeteria allows them some flexibility to not have to utilize the entire building for an athletic function in the wintertime. The cafeteria also gets service from the football field when there will be activities at the football stadium as well. Just to the north of that area is of the main gymnasium is the locker room functions, athletic offices on the first floor. On the second level, you'll find auxiliary gym and also a fitness room. The auxiliary gym, I can't recall if Sarah mentioned this, is the area that is kind of the second tallest area of the building, which tops out at about 45 feet. So again, it's quite a bit less than the 75 feet that we spoke about just a little bit ago. And then again, additional renovations will be occurring at Old Main. That is really renovations that will entail making the entire facility ADA accessible, which it currently is not. The main features of that building in its new renovated existence will be admin. That's the central admin area, as well as the old the existing auditorium will be translated into a new media center library area, kind of a double height space. So again, all ADA accessible for the entire facility, again, which is not the current condition. So this aerial perspective, again, is the one that's on the far left, on my left, is indicative, I guess, of the whole massing. You can kind of tell that area on the southernmost wing, the area that sticks up to the 75 feet. That area that goes up to the 75 feet is really the area that is confined over the stage space. As you move away from the stage space and move to the east, that volume is going down a little bit. As you move to the north, you're really approaching a level that is either equal to the height of Old Main or less than that in most of those areas. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about materiality as we get into the next few slides. These shadow studies are really indicative of a series of studies that we've undertaken to really understand what happens on the site during the course of a normal day, in spring, in summer, in fall, and winter. Really, a lot of the areas that will largely be affected, for the most part, will be centered around those areas that are courtyard spaces off to the east, some areas to the west in the wintertime, just based upon the lower angles of the sun. And that seems to be when the more intense sort of shadow effects would be happening. The first floor, again, just a quick outline of that. There will be first floor in Old Main is where the admin wing will be. They'll be doing some classroom updates and some updates to the floors to make everything ADA accessible. The main entry is basically the space between Old Main and Wing A right now. That's where your public entrance will be happening. So from the south side, and then if you were to go into the auditorium, you'd rise up to the second level. But again, this is just kind of showing the general layout of the building. Taking you up to the second level. The second level of Wing A is really has a minor floor plate in that area. The large area that will be accomplished in those areas will be a few classrooms, but circulation from Old Main to the remainder of the wings of the new addition, but also the orchestra pit in Wing A. As you can see, the gymnasium on the northernmost wing is a top-loaded gymnasium, so again, it has ability to service ADA at both levels as well. Again, additional classrooms stacked into the middle wing. And then the third level, which aligns out with the top level of Old Main, where you'll have sort of the second level of the media center, and looking at the open space. But this is where your auditorium is occurring, black box theater in the southernmost wing, and then you have the third level of the classroom wing at Wing B. So in terms of material, we have a few examples here, and largely we've focused upon. We all know sort of the materiality of Old Main. That's not going to change. There will be some things that will be updated on it. The district has a great desire to really streamline the effect. There have been some things that have been added over the years to ensure that the masonry is sound and intact. And those things will be additionally remedied. We'll be removing some of the steel channels that are on the side of the building right now as a part of our efforts in design and construction to really bring back the true nature of Old Main. That's been one thing that we've really heard is something not only from the students, the faculty, the administration in North Kansas City, but also the community and some of the community members that we've had interaction with. The new wing, the addition, will be comprised of largely a couple of different materials, and so largely precast is kind of one of the main materials, and so the textured or the sort of depth, the piece on the far table here, it has basically a texture to it. That's going to be the largest component of the precast to really give it a good amount of texture, and that. The coloration is really derived from sort of the entry portal pieces and the accent pieces of Old Main, and really trying to match that color. One of the things that we've really tried to do is remain in harmony with that in terms of the accents, and really not trying to overpower Old Main and trying to recreate Old Main as well. The piece in the middle are the accent pieces that will sort of happen in tandem with above and below windows, and so it'll be more of a flat texture, but that same color. And then the areas that are stairways on the west, and then also the boxes that you'll see on the west side of. Let's see. Let me go back. The areas that are the stairways that poke out to the west, and the areas and the links that house restrooms and utility functions will be this gray concrete precast panel, so more of a standard gray.
Say that one more time.
The areas
Yes.
that they are basically the stairways that poke out to the west, and then in the courtyards there are these little areas that similarly poke out into the courtyards that will sort of be that accent gray color. We also have, let's see, we also have a metal panel material. Actually, I'll go back, and so the fly space over the auditorium will be this gray metal panel that sits on the flat precast panel that serves as this little hat that sits up on top of the auditorium, as well as the two hats that rest over both gymnasiums. It'll be sort of a lighter metal material. And then the links and then the punched windows in each one of the wings will be comprised of just aluminum framed glazing system, which is sort of the lighter color of the metal panel that's located on the table here. So. The elevations, again, they're both on screen, but also the second board that we have set up over here really kind of give you a sense of scale as related to Old Main. Again, the scale of the drawing in the south elevation that really dictate the 75-foot height in that area. Can be seen in these drawings, as well as this notion of the step down in scale as you move more towards the north side of the site. The idea is that you're basically just constantly stepping down, and also if you look at the bottom elevation, the west elevation, one of the things that we really tried to do, and I think the courtyards really helped this out because this is a large sort of building that has to house a lot of program. Is to really sort of insert those voids into the building, so it really seems as though it's a series of buildings instead of just one big large mass. And we've also done that same separation between Old Main, so that you really do read this as a series of buildings and not just one big piece that's just attached to Old Main. So
On these precast, that's kind of the way they're building Marodi's down there. You bring in a panel and set it down.
Right. So, and one of the things we've been discussing, and we are having sort of bi-weekly meetings with the city, Sarah and Mallory and the rest of the city staff is talking about and Jay Dunn, our construction manager, has been involved in that. They understand there's not a lot of breathing room in terms of construction, and so one of these the panels that we're talking about using represent a process that is more of a just-in-time delivery process instead of stockpiling these things. they'll be delivered, and as they're delivered, they're going to be going up instead of just sitting on site or sitting in an area around the site. So,
Before we get to any more questions, any more presentation from staff?
I would go over the 2 criteria for review, if you're ready for that.
Sure.
The zoning ordinance establishes 2 criteria for review of this type for public and quasi-public facilities. The first is that the capability of the site to accommodate the building parking and drives with reasonable open space and safe and easy ingress and egress. So to divide that into 2 parts, first, parking. The zoning ordinance does not establish a parking requirement specifically for schools. We do have a requirement for churches, theaters, athletic fields, assembly halls, and other seating facilities. That's 1 parking space per 3 seats. It's unclear whether it was intended to include schools in that category, and it's hard to really judge how many seats a school has on a day-to-day basis. So given that, we've been working with the applicant just to ensure that we will have the same number of parking spaces to serve the school facility at the end of this project as we do today. They did submit a parking plan to you showing off-site parking areas that will be developed as part of this overall project. To summarize, there will be a net increase of 2 parking spaces with all of those parking areas included and taking out the parking that will be lost as the site is redeveloped. Some of that parking is being secured through leases. The school district has a lease with the First Baptist Church, and there is a lease that will be on the council's agenda for next Tuesday regarding a piece of city-owned property that currently is partially used for parking, and the amended lease will include the rest of the area, some additional parking areas. I would note that we do not know anything about future changes in enrollments, so what we've been focused on to date is just ensuring the same number of parking spaces as this project finishes. Regarding ingress and egress, they have been working with the fire and the community development departments regarding access and circulation through the site, particularly for emergency vehicles. The current site plan does satisfy code requirements, and the fire marshal has signed off on how they intend to provide access. That is also why we have a specific recommended condition for you to include about access along the site. It will be mainly along the west side of the parcel, a one-way alley, really, from 23rd Street to 23rd Avenue to 26th Avenue. The second criteria for review is a reasonable degree of harmony will prevail between the architectural quality of the proposed public building or church and the surrounding neighborhood. As they've indicated in their report, they have indicated that the design of the addition is intended to reflect architectural qualities of the existing building, particularly through their material choices. So we'll leave that more subjective review up to you. Staff does recommend approval, and we've suggested 4 proposed conditions for you to include in your approval. One is that site plans for the off-street parking areas shall come before you for review and approval before those areas are constructed, and that there will be landscaping included to avoid impacts on adjacent residential uses. The second concerns a license agreement with the city to permit the construction of Wing C over an existing sanitary sewer easement. The third regards access and the specific widths of the access drive and of the curb cuts. And the fourth is our kind of standard condition when you do a site plan approval, that they'll comply with all requested amendments or revisions by staff as we finish review of building codes, utility requirements, and other site plan items. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about the staff report.
Sarah, as I made mention when we called the meeting to order, we have a public comment portion at the beginning of every meeting. I would defer those public comments with regard to this agenda item to now. So I would entertain any members of the public who would have some public comment upon the proposal. With this caveat, it's really not a question and answer session, but an opportunity for you to have a voice before we ask questions of the applicant ourselves. So we would certainly welcome any members of the public who'd like to step forward, identify yourself, and make comment before we move through the rest of the agenda. Okay, seeing none. Do any members of the commission have questions for the applicant?
The one thing that the school now is really lacking is cafeteria and library. So those two things will be addressed.
That's correct. Again, the cafeteria, which currently serves around 200 right now, will with the student population as it is now, they will be able to service the student population with 4 lunch periods within Northtown itself. And then if the student population increases, they will switch that to 5 lunch periods to be able to service up to 1,800 students in one.
You guarantee us they're gonna have a closed campus?
I can't guarantee that. That would be a question for the district. And then your other one was library media center, and yes, that actually is the other component again that I spoke about in my initial comments with the existing auditorium being converted into an ADA accessible library media center.
Any other questions? Tom? I've got a question for you. One of the criteria that we're required to review is stated as follows. A reasonable degree of harmony will prevail between the architectural quality of the proposed public building or church and the surrounding neighborhood. While I personally am a fan of contemporary architecture, I have a hard time understanding how this design is in a reasonable degree of harmony where there's no other contemporary architecture within blocks. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think, again, a couple of things that we're trying to take into account with the material choices that we've had. We have a very tight site, and I think the mayor had asked a question about the material actually coming into site. We also have another element, which is a very tight budget in terms of what the district has allocated through the bond referendum that they had approved for this. And precast really lends itself to a couple of things. One is that just-in-time construction as opposed to really stockpiling materials all over the site or in adjacent areas. We really do think the approach architecturally has been to remain as simple as possible, but to also focus on really, really simple things like natural daylight. So each classroom and each typical classroom or major classroom space or largely occupied classroom space has access to natural daylight. And that was a big component of the design. From a scale standpoint, all of those apertures are pretty much in line with the scale ratio of what's happening on Old Main in terms of the openings that are happening. I understand that it's also precast concrete, so that sometimes maybe has a specific connotation to it as well. But I think we've really erred on the side of just remaining simple and keeping the building down to manageable parts, such as the wing approach. We have chosen to really harmonize at least the palette with what's at Old Main right now in terms of the accent pieces that are at Old Main. Simply the front entry is one example of that stone accent portion, as well as the sort of horizontal banding that's occurring. And so we've really tried to take advantage of that and really focus on a color harmony with those pieces. It's really difficult to match the brick that's on Old Main right now. And so we've really not attempted to do that because we think the chance of failure is probably quite a bit bigger in that regard. And so precast and sort of a simple palette of materials is also aimed at not really taking away from the grandeur of Old Main in a lot of ways, because that was something that we heard a lot about is you can't mimic that. Types of construction that are happening today just probably won't get us there. And so we've erred on the side of sort of being just very gentle, I guess, in our representation in harmony with Old Main. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
It does. I hear you using Old Main as the touchstone.
Mm-hmm.
the criteria that guides us is reasonable degree of harmony with the proposed public building and the surrounding neighborhood. So the surrounding neighborhood would necessarily incorporate residential stakeholders as well. As part of your information gathering, did you get input from residential stakeholders as part of this design?
We had several public meetings dating back to before the bond referendum was passed, and so taking us back even prior to August, early August of last year, we had a series of public meetings that were held at the district as well as at Northtown, and neighbors were actually invited to come and give their opinion. I think there were a lot of opportunities, and we actually took that input and really tried to incorporate it in. I mean, we heard a lot of things related to not only what the building looked like, but some of the key issues that are present within Northtown, such as just traffic. Parking was always was one. I think also just infrastructure harmony with Northtown. So I understand. This is a lot of the criteria that we have looked at for design. And if you look at national standards, they're very predicated on more of a suburban model of a school. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of breathing room in Northtown. And so even in its current existence, really quite distinctly backs up to a lot of those residences. And so I think what we're really trying to balance, and the district is trying to balance, is taking advantage of an academic program that has equality with the rest of the district, but also trying to do it on a very, very tight site. And that's been our challenge all the way around. I mean, I think going through the BZA process with the height variance was something, we heard public comments on that as well. And I think more than anything, I believe the assessment of the height was probably a more critical piece to it. So that's really been our approach.
I think there's no doubt that this commission has heard evidence that some of the housing stock in the city is itself obsolete. And so this development, if approved, could be an impetus for some new changes in other ways. So I'm not being critical.
Oh, no.
I'm just trying to make a record here pursuant to the criteria we're to evaluate. Finally, do you have depictions of the parking that would be new parking? Clearly, we're going to lose some substantial parking by this development. Can you flash before us where that new parking would be based upon some representation that you have here this evening?
Yeah, I think we do have it. It's in the other presentation. Is that right, Kyle? Site plan. Is it this one? The site plan. Oop. Let's see. So one portion of this, the overall representation of what the district has is not present within the site plan. The agreements that are set forth in it, for what is set on the site here to the north side, this actually takes into account what we're able to take advantage of on the north portion of the site.
Yes.
But the surrounding areas it's not a part of our scope of work currently with this project. As Sarah had mentioned, there is a separate sort of track happening, an agreement that has been made with the city for the additional scopes of parking.
Jeff,
And
if you want to pull up our website, we posted it online.
Oh, great.
That might be the easiest way to do
Oops.
it.
Sarah, I guess maybe just to shorten this a bit, before final commission approval is given with regard to new parking, will residents in proximity to that new parking be afforded notice and an opportunity to be heard?
It's not required because, again, this is a site plan review before the Planning Commission, not a public hearing.
Right.
However, if you wanted to direct us to provide notice to adjacent property owners, we could certainly do that. The challenge is that the deadline for the applicant, who is a different firm than BNIM, is just 2 weeks before your next meeting. So we may not be mailing it with much more than a couple of weeks' notice. Because while we at this point are anticipating that being on the June agenda, it's possible that it's not ready and ends up sliding to July. So we would be waiting to get that application before we would be sending out a notice.
But if we're giving a gratuitous notice rather than one that's compulsory,
Right. I just want to make you aware that we would not be able to provide a 15-day notice as we typically do. It would be shorter than that. But if you would like us to do that, we can certainly do so.
okay, thank you.
So what I've pulled up here per Sarah's recommendation is the total parking allocation for the new facility that does increase that number by a few spots. I believe it's 4. Is that two spots? Sorry. So the area to the north of the new addition adds 18 spaces and 7 ADA spaces, and then you look at the area that would be utilized north of Norclay as well. 62 new spaces just to the east of Norclay. And then as you move down, additional spaces, both this L-shaped lot, which would be new spaces as well. The existing parking lot southeast of Old Main, and then some east of Main, and then some located near at the First Baptist Church.
One question I wanted to ask, I did know it's in the parking plan, you notice, leveraging existing parking that you have at the Baptist Church and stuff, that seems like a good idea. There's the 62 new spaces there at Norclay that you see up on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a consideration, I know just behind, there you have the parking lot already with Mackin Park. Was that a consideration to utilize those spaces? Was that an option?
That's a good question. So we have had some internal discussion about it. The fact is that that's a public parking lot, and for all we know, there are people who park there every day and walk to the high school, and
Okay.
we just don't know who they are. But the concern about using that for the high school on a regular ongoing basis is that that parking does get used for park programming. Particularly in the summer on Fridays. I know that's their heaviest usage, but it is sometimes used by the public. And so there was a concern about having all of that used on a regular basis, that might impact parks programming. That said, we do have an understanding with the school district and with the First Baptist Church that on days when the church has a funeral and anticipates needing to use their parking area for people attending a funeral, that students would be directed to park at the Mackin Park parking lot in order to free up spaces for funeral attendees. So we do anticipate using that space on an occasional basis.
Sarah, there are a couple of proposed conditions that staff has made. Can you just address these two briefly so I may more fully understand them? The second proposed condition has to do with an easement with regard to Wing C. Can you articulate that for me?
There's an existing sewer easement that crosses the parcel that is owned by the school district. It's actually in the location where an alley used to be. Gentry Street used to cross this property and was vacated by the city. There was also an alley that crossed this property east-west that was vacated by the city in the 1960s. Yeah. When that alley was vacated, though, we maintained rights to maintain, operate, repair, relocate the sewer that was located there. So we have an easement in that area for the sanitary sewer line. Wing C will be built over that sanitary sewer easement, and doing that does require a license agreement from the city because it encroaches on our rights to maintain, operate, repair, relocate that sewer. Now, we have had many discussions about that sewer line with the applicant, with their engineer, with the Public Works Department. They have reached an agreement about how that sanitary sewer line is going to be treated. It's going to be in a steel pipe, encased in steel, so that we are able to, protect it and clean it out, replace it if it needs to be. But still, even with that understanding, from a legal point of view, a license agreement is required.
And then proposed condition number 3 with regard to this west side of the parcel,
Yes.
speak to that.
So for the fire department, one of the fire marshal's key concerns anytime we review new development is how is he going to get access if the building were to catch on fire, if there were to be something which required emergency medical response, how am I going to get access to all sides of a new building? And particularly in this site, because it is so tight, he's very concerned about access. So access along that west side in particular, because all other 3 sides of the campus are street accessible. We have had a lot of conversations about that. So and they've been talking about the particulars and how wide that access drive is, how wide those curb cuts are so that they can make the turn from 23rd Avenue onto that access drive and get up to 26th Avenue. For the courtyards, their concern is, those courtyards are going to be important for them to get access into different parts of the building. So that's why the fire marshal wrote out this condition with regards to what they have agreed to for access, for that access drive for trucks to get from 23rd to 26th, and also for crews and their equipment to get into the facility. So that comes directly from the fire marshal.
So it's fire marshal driven and public safety.
Yes.
Okay. All right, any other questions from the commission? Thank you. Any other questions from the public? Seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion on the case.
I move that we approve the site plan with the following conditions that were spoke of. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Do I need to go say each one of them?
Well, you can just adopt those that are presented by staff.
Presented by staff.
Okay.
I move that we approve as presented by staff.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. All right.
I might say one thing. There was some talk about the school district, possibly even shutting this school down and moving and building it someplace else, which might have been cheaper. But I certainly didn't want to see the North Kansas City School District moving out of North Kansas City to where they didn't even have a presence here. So I think whatever we have to do to try to make this thing work is going to be good for the city, it's going to be good for our residents, and going to be good for everybody.
I would note that, your site plan approval is the final action, well, with the exception of some additional staff tweaking for the site plan. We do expect the additional off-site parking areas to be on the June agenda, but it's possible that that could be July.
Mr. Mayor, there's no doubt that this is a tremendous development, a tremendous investment for the city. I certainly wouldn't want anyone to interpret my examination to be anything other than thoroughness as opposed to criticism, because indeed it is not. I'm tickled by it. And I think it could be the start of even, as I said earlier, a new impetus for more investment and growth. So thank you for the thorough presentation and the materials.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sure there's some members out in the audience that went to North Kansas City High School.
Very good. Okay, next on our agenda, Number 8, consideration of a design review application from Mid-America Contractors. Can we have staff report on procedure?
Similar procedure as your last case. Again, this is a design review that's required because the building is located in our C2 zoning district, where we have a set of specific design guidelines for all development in this zoning district. And so any proposed development comes before you for review pursuant to those design guidelines and approval before moving forward. So again, no public hearing required. We did no notice on these, which we just typically do not. And you will determine whether or not to approve the site plan, or to approve the design review before staff finalizes site plan approval. And we do have the applicant, Jeff Schrader of Sharhaig Architects, here to make a presentation to you.
Sure. So we'll call on the applicant. Step forward, introduce yourself. Welcome. You're among friends. Sarah, any comments from staff?
I would just point out a couple of things. As Jeff said, we have a long list of design guidelines for the zoning district, and we really don't have any major concerns about this building's, complying with those design guidelines. Even with the revised facade that he's presented this evening, we just really don't have any concerns. I would point out a couple of things regarding suggested conditions for approval of this. One is that the building is being proposed to be built across what is currently two separate parcels. So they would need to be combined into one lot prior to issuing of a building permit, because we don't issue building permits for buildings to cross a property line. This is a very minor detail, doing combining these two lots that's done administratively, so shouldn't pose an issue. It's just something that has to be done before a permit is issued. We did make a note that they're showing some parking off of the alley on the east side of the parcel, and including some accessible parking spaces. Those do have to be marked in a specific way to comply with state law. And so that would, that's just a detail that's missing from the submitted plans. Other than that, we have no major concerns about this particular building and would recommend approval.
Any questions from commissioners for the applicant or staff?
Okay, this is gonna go on those two lots, the one that was burnt down, and then the one next door to it. Where you gonna get your parking?
They're not required to provide any off-street parking in this zoning district, but they are providing 9 parking spaces on the east side that would be accessed off of the alley. But they could provide none and comply with the zoning ordinance.
I didn't know that. Okay,
Any other questions?
a lot better looking than a vacant lot.
Indeed. All right, the chair will entertain a motion on the case.
I recommend approval for site plan at 1425 Swift with the suggested conditions that Sarah presented to us.
To include those statements regarding
Correct.
parking.
Yes.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Congratulations. Thank you. Glad to have you.
Get to work.
All right, next on the agenda is actually a public hearing. Consideration of a conditional use permit, the Kansas City Curling Club. Let's first hear staff report on procedure. Sarah?
So as you mentioned, this is a public hearing.
Finally.
This is a conditional use permit application that requires publication of notice in the Kansas City Star, a posted notice on the property, and mailed notice to property owners within 185 feet, which we did 15 days ago in compliance with the ordinance. The applicant is here to make a presentation. Conditional use permits, you make a recommendation to the city council, which takes final action on approving or denying the conditional use permit, and you can take it from there.
All right, let's open the public hearing. I hereby open the public hearing on case PC 201702, and we would welcome a presentation from the applicant. Come forward, introduce yourself. You're among friends. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Blake Palmer, and I'm a member of the Kansas City Curling Club. And our proposal is to use a vacant warehouse at 200 West 9th Avenue to promote the sport of the Olympic sport of curling. We would like to get youth more involved into it. Currently, we just lease, we get ice time up at the Line Creek Community Center.
Sure.
We only get a couple hours a week, so by putting our own ice in, we can expand presence of curling in the Kansas City area.
Nice.
Yeah.
You may, Mr. Mayor.
It's not cheap to make ice, is it?
What's that?
It's not cheap to make ice, is
No,
it?
it's not.
Yeah,
The,
pretty good investment.
Don't go. Sarah, staff presentation.
Sure. And Mallory was actually the one to prepare this staff
nice.
report, so I will have her make the presentation tonight.
Mallory?
So, as a little bit of background here for you, similar to a lot of other buildings in North Kansas City, this building is unique in that it takes up almost the entire lot. So there really is no on-site parking. So that is why they're coming before you for the conditional use permit to obtain parking from other sources, off-site parking. So I will go through the criteria for review. There are 6 criteria for review. I can just kind of go through them briefly if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So, number 1 is whether the proposed use at the specified location is consistent with the policies embodied in the adopted master plan. We adopted our new master plan in 2016, and this property happens to be located within the industrial traditional character area. The planning strategies for that area include supporting the reuse of buildings where appropriate. This application does comply with the master plan in that it is an adaptive reuse of the building. Number 2 would be whether the proposed use is consistent with the general purpose and intent of the applicable zoning district regulations and complies with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. This is unique in the fact that, like I said, the building does take up almost the entire lot. So therefore, we would not allow a building to be built like that today. So we would consider this building a legal, non-conforming structure. So in addition, the parking also does not conform. We would require in this zoning district 4.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area. And this building has no parking on site. The city has established policies to provide property owners with numerous options to meet this requirement, one of which is obtaining property off-site. So this application does do that, and this application supports the zoning ordinance because it does reuse the building for a new purpose other than manufacturing or warehousing. So 3 would be whether the proposed condition use may be material detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare of properties within the vicinity. We can't find anything that would make this detrimental to properties within the vicinity. It should be noted that this warehouse has been vacant for 3 years, so we definitely see this as an improvement to the area. And most of the parking will take place in off-business hours, so it won't really have too much of an effect on the surrounding property. The next is whether the proposed use is compatible with and preserves the character and integrity of the adjacent development and neighborhoods. It includes improvements or modifications either on-site or within public right-of-way to mitigate any adverse impacts, such as noise, traffic, odor, visual nuisances. This application does do that. It is a heavy industrial area, so there's not too much that could impact it in a negative way, but we do think that all improvements that they would make to both the interior and exterior of the building would have a positive impact on the surrounding properties. The next is whether the proposed use will generate pedestrian or vehicular traffic that will be hazardous. Again, their business hours will be mostly in off times. Most businesses over there are 8 to 5. There's will be a lot of evening and weekend business, so we don't see any problem there. And finally, whether the proposed use will comply with other regulations of the district in which it is located. Again, it's located in the M2 district, which is a heavy industrial district, and we feel that it will ultimately comply with everything, and then eventually all building codes. The building will be required to comply with all building codes. So, staff would recommend approval of this conditional use permit with 4 conditions. 6 conditions. The applicant shall provide either on-site or through parking arrangements with adjacent property owners 40 parking spaces, 2 of which shall be ADA compliant. The applicant shall indicate through paint, striping, signage, or other methods where parking shall be prohibited, such as at but not limited to required points of ingress, egress, fire hydrant clearances, etc. The applicant will work with the Community Development Department staff to finalize specific locations and methods. 3, the applicant shall notify the Community Development Department of any reduction or elimination of shared parking agreements. 4, within 30 days of occupancy, the Community Development staff will do an inspection of the parking to ensure that it does comply. 5, the conditional use permit only applies to the use described herein. This is standard that we have on every application. And finally, 6, the continuation and effectiveness of this permit is contingent on the operation being conducted without any effects detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. Again, that's standard on every conditional use permit application that you see.
Any commission questions for the applicant?
Cable Road is a private street. I didn't even know we had a cable road in Northtown.
Someone owns it.
Yeah, I drove down there today, and first of all, how in the hell did you find the place? Yeah, I can see that if it can be used, we ought to use it.
What's your current, I'm not even sure what the vocabulary is. How many participants do you have at the current Line Creek facility?
We currently have about 100 members.
Okay.
But we anticipate that to grow to 300 with the dedicated ice. Dedicated ice is really a big thing.
And then how many people would you expect at a normal curling practice or session? What would it be?
It would be during off-business hours, in the evening and on the weekends.
Was that like 20 members or 50? Or?
Oh,
Yeah. What's your intent?
There's 4 sheets of ice, and each sheet supports 4 players, or 8 players,
Okay.
so 32 at a time.
I would note that the 40 parking space number came from the applicant. They put together a little explanation of how many vehicles they think they would have at a peak time. And based on the number of players that they would have at a time, and estimating how many people would arrive in a vehicle. And that should have been in your packet with the application.
Just want every-
Because this type of use, you're required to set that parking requirement. It's not specified in the zoning ordinance.
I can just see a trend where North Kansas City is becoming famous for pickleball and curling. It's pretty awesome.
And rock climbing. Don't forget the rock
And
climbing
rock
and the
climbing.
wrestling.
All right, thank you. Now we'll take any comments from the public with regard to the conditional use permit application. All right, seeing no members of the public.
Speak up.
All right. I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. I'd also entertain a motion to make a recommendation to the city council.
I move that we recommend to the city council that we approve this cup with the following conditions that Mallory set forth.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All approved. Welcome.
Well, not quite. This will be
Well,
on the
All
June
approved from us. Let's put it that way.
This will also appear on the June 6th city council agenda.
All right, next on the agenda, item number 10 is comments from staff.
I don't know that we have any additional comments
All
tonight. I would note that we have coming up in June, on June 13th, a community meeting regarding our Armor Road Complete Street plan. We had our first meeting with our advisory group 2 weeks ago. Last week? Time's starting to get away from me. Byron Spencer was asked to represent the Planning Commission on this, so he'll be representing you at these meetings. We do have meeting notes that we've gotten back from the consultant. It's been a long day today, and so we'll circulate those to you as well in case you're interested in reading more about the conversation that the advisory group had when they had that meeting. But June 13th, it will be from 4 to 6:30, kind of our standard arrangement where people can drop by any time. We'll have a couple of set presentation times. We'll also be notifying people about this in the newsletter that's about to go out pretty soon, and mailing postcards to businesses that are along Armor Road, as well as our typical Facebook and Twitter, etc. But I hope that you will mark your calendars for that and plan to attend.
All right, next on the agenda, comments from commissioners. Sarah, we both worked on the chicken and pickle development with regard to parking. I don't recall historically, because my mind is such that I don't. It seems to me that we did not make a requirement with regard to certain parking because of where it was located.
No, we did. I don't recall when we did that because we have been working on that project for quite a while.
Right.
But we did ask you to set their parking requirement because it's very clear in the zoning ordinance how much parking is required for
Right.
restaurants. But anytime you start getting into recreational uses, in general, those are required to come to you for the parking requirement to be set. So we did, and the reason I can remember is that we looked through, like, what is a pickleball court? Is it more analogous to
Right.
volleyball court or to tennis? And so I know we did that research and putting together a recommendation for you. So you did set the parking requirement for that use, but it's probably been at least a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, maybe more at this point.
The success of that is stunning. Good for them. Any other comments from commissioners?
I have one real quick. I didn't want to bring this up during the school discussion because I don't want to derail the conversation necessarily. But I do have concern about some of the planned parking for the school. And again, I don't want that to be something that derails the development itself, but it seems to me it's come time for the city to look into its longer term parking needs. With the school, I know on a Friday or Saturday night, even with all the parking at the pickleball, at Chicken and Pickle, parking can still be a challenge with all of that's going on down there. Is the city, looking into other ways to maybe more efficiently park people at peak times for certain parts of the city, not just singling out the school, but other than just plowing into any empty space we have to create more surface parking?
We don't have any projects like that going on at this time. That's something that has come up in the initial focus groups and advisory committee meeting that we had for the Armor Road Complete Street Plan. That's one of the reasons that they, in the survey that they did associated with that, asked the question whether people thought there was too much, the right amount, or too little parking in downtown. And I would say it's about 60% think there's too little and 40% think that it's just right at this point. So if you're directing us to look into doing that, we will certainly take that under advisement, but it's not a project that we have going on right now.
Can we add that to the agenda for the next meeting as a discussion item? Parking generally?
Yes, I don't know how much information we would be able to present at the next meeting, but we will certainly take a look at it and at least have something that we could start a conversation about.
Yeah, I don't know that it has to be project specific, but
Right.
generally, I'd like to have a discussion about the commission's jurisdiction with regard to parking issues generally. I think that would maybe make us more informed. I have noticed, like, I don't want to put words in John's mouth, that we seem to be spending more and more time on begging, borrowing, and stealing parking for one project over the other. And then with this great new development that seems to be forthcoming from the city, now we're doing it even deeper into residential areas. And
Good.
I'm not sure it feels planned on my part or maybe just patched together. And that's what has me a little more anxious about it.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Kevin, kind of my concern describes my concern is seems patched together, and I think that would be helpful. I didn't even think about that, Kevin. But glad you brought that up. Next time, because I don't even know what our jurisdiction is. You asked if I'm giving you a directive, do I have the ability to do that? I don't.
Right. I would point out, and the master plan did talk some about recommending that we look into doing parking management plans in various areas of the city. With the idea being, if you look at the parking area between 13th and 14th behind Burlington as an example, where the city spent a lot of time and resources into assembling some parcels and doing improvements to provide parking to all of the associated property owners. We might not spend as much time and resources on every block in the city, but where is it appropriate for us to consider doing that? So what I think that we would do, and I think we could prepare for next time, is at least an overview of the commission's role in parking issues in general, maybe a high-level inventory of our parking, particularly in and around downtown, and then think about some ways that we could address that in a less patched together way moving forward, and to see if you had some additional thoughts.
I've just heard in at least my peer group that, parking took kind of a rap in Kansas City, Missouri, when suddenly parking fees came in overnight and people were paying tremendous amounts to park in public spaces. I think one of the amenities that we have is we didn't have parking issues for so long, and I'm glad we're having parking issues. It's a great problem to have. That doesn't mean we couldn't plan for the continued growth that's forthcoming, and I think just a primer on those issues, coupled with our new master plan, what we've just gone through, I think would help just make us that much more informed.
Sure.
Well, one thing I might say is that there's been a number of, like high-rise parking. But I don't think the city has any appetite to build it, you know.
I get it.
And what we're trying to do is businesses that have, you know, there's been businesses here that have talked about building high-rise parking and incorporate other things into it to more or less pay for it. And I'm hoping that maybe we can get the business community to kind of step up and help with this parking situation. I mean, it's a.
Sure.
I didn't mean to get on you about something.
You got pretty thick skin. Okay, any other comments from commissioners generally? Okay, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Last item on the agenda.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good meeting tonight.
Hey, Mallory, you want these back?
Welcome. We have met before. Oh, thank you.
Well, I know, but I mean, my concern is, I don't want them to build this in thinking that now, I'm looking more at this property here and this property here, and I don't even know who owns this, this is already part of the school or
It looks
what.
like it's part of it.
But, you know, kind of what I'm saying is, you know,
Once it becomes a parking lot, what is it?
well, yeah,
Okay,
and
we're-
you can easily
make her
take out a asphalt parking lot, put something else in.
Love it.
Then when it really comes, when you have,
Oh, good.
you know, more development going on here and people start saying, yeah, like you see all those like real expensive.
Here to do business and to welcome it all.
Narrow lot homes
Right?
they put on the west side. stuff
Absolutely.
like that. People want to come in and say, yeah, I want to start putting those here, like putting those in here, I mean, those better uses for that. And then if they want to do that, then they start taking that parking out. Well, then where are they going to park? And then they'll park. So my, you know, instead of like patching this together, why don't we try to come up with a long-term plan? I mean, and you start talking about,
Yeah.
you know, parking garages. I don't know where you can
exactly.
put one that's close.
It's gonna be a nice-
necessarily, but I mean,
Yeah.
that seems like a logical choice. I mean, if the school can then charge students to then they for a parking pass, parking garage, that seems like a built-in customer base to finance parking garage privately. Well, if you have, I don't know, like 200 students who are going to pay for a parking garage permit. Yeah, we have.
Nice to meet you too. I'll see you around the neighborhood.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, sure, but that's why I'm saying if they pay for parking already, why don't they put that money towards a parking garage where they can then you've already got I don't know, I think Max's or something is proposed something like that. I don't know how much it is. If you've got 200 students paying, I don't know what, $50 a year, 80 a year. So to make the math easy, say there's 100 students. I don't know. That's $800 a year, which I know is a drop in the bucket, but hey, it's still something.